Thank you all for being here. We appreciate especially Alicia Whedon and Wade Lowry for joining us today for this Competencies Showcase panel discussion that we're going to have. And from the ITRC with me today are Lisa Kidder and Paul Lynch, Ryan Randall, and Mark Cooper. And so we appreciate you joining us today because we have some exciting things that are happening in the world of competencies. And to get us started, Lisa's going to explain a little bit about the shared value that this discussion can have for future work with competencies and with other departments.
So we've been working on competencies for, I think, almost 3 years now. And so this is a project that has long been in the process. It's been exciting to see how we've taken things that were available in Moodle and able to customize and adapt them to meet the needs of the different organizations that you'll hear from as we go through a couple of questions. It's been exciting to watch the reports that come out and the benefits that this provides for each of the programs as they work through accreditation or annual review, any type of assessment. And it's exciting that we're going to be recording this so that we can share your work with everybody else. So thank you, Alicia and Wade, for joining us to share the work that you've worked with us. It's been a collaboration. So thank you so much.
Yeah, hard work. Alicia and Wade, if you wouldn't mind, would you introduce yourself just briefly and talk a little bit about what you do at ISU, what department you're in?
You bet. You want to go ahead first, Alicia?
Sure. I'm Alicia Whedon, and I am in nutrition and dietetics. I work as the undergraduate program director there. And in our most recent update for accreditation, we now have to track individual student competencies. So that's where ITRC has come in at and been very helpful for me.
And I'm with the Health Information Technology program. And just like Alicia, we have competencies that we need to track. And it's very specific that each student must have at least 2 touch points with each competency throughout their education. Previously, we tracked that spreadsheet, or, okay, we're getting close to accreditation, we need to really look at this. And so when this was offered up, I'm the guinea pig for our program. When this was offered up, we decided this would be something that would be very beneficial in tracking those student competencies.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So I'm going to ask some questions and hopefully you can answer them to the best of your ability and what you know so far about competencies. But we realize that competencies in and of themselves are still evolving for us. And so we want to really dive a little deeper into those, and our work continues in the ITRC to make sure that we're doing our very best to help faculty and whole programs and departments integrate this new way of looking at student achievement, and new for us. So first of all, and you talked a little bit about this, but maybe go into a little bit more specific detail. Why did you or your department decide to use Moodle competencies in the first place? And can you give us some specific reasons, maybe beyond what you've already mentioned?
For us, it was just very much a natural outgrowth of the EISU QM program. And so in my department, there are several of us that have taken courses through that program where you take a very deep dive into your courses and make sure that every single item in that course is linked to a standard so that you're presenting the students exactly what they need to have, and you're getting rid of all that fluff that maybe existed previously in your course. So I've been through that process a couple of times, and this really was just a natural next step of saying, okay, we've got a really clean course. It meets those EISU standards for QM. And now let's go ahead and make sure that we are truly meeting those competencies for those students and giving them those, at least at a minimum, 2 touch points on every competency. So the two, I think, are very much linked to each other. They very much are symbiotic. They work well together. So if anybody's thinking of going through this process, I would say take a look at the EISU process and go ahead and blend the two together, because it becomes a very powerful tool in meeting accreditation standards and in providing a really high quality product for your student.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Alicia?
I have a slightly different experience in that our competencies were handed down by an accreditation body and knew that we would now have to track each individual student in achieving those competencies. We only have to assess one time as a summative assessment, which usually comes in their senior year, occasionally in their junior year, depending on where the student's at. And it was new, and this big, huge now data tracking requirement on the director's piece. And as I was going through the listserv of all the other directors freaking out over this, one of them mentioned their learning management system was going to be able to help them track competencies. So I called ITRC to see what we could do. And they're like, yeah, we can do this. So it was great news for me. And it's so easy because you helped build in my competencies. And now we just time to assessments, and I get this lovely report at the end of each semester. So it's no longer a big burden and data tracking now.
Yeah, thank you. And I love that you said it's so easy, because it really is. I know we hear the word competency, it sounds really complicated, right? But it really is not a hard process. And the ITRC is right here ready to get them into your course, to get your frameworks built and to help you customize it to meet your program needs. That's a message that I want to be really transparent about. So you've already mentioned a little bit about how easy it has been, but was there anything that was difficult or particularly easy about the process? Does anything come to mind?
The most difficult part's been making sure that faculty are incorporating those into their courses, because we have several faculty that are teaching, and so making sure everybody's doing it and making sure we linked them right. We had a little bit of a learning curve last year, and so the reports took a little bit longer to get to the point where we wanted them to. And so that was probably our biggest challenge, was just getting everybody on board and making sure everybody remembered to do it, because it was new last year.
For us, there were really no issues. Again, you're a little bit further along, Alicia, than we are in the process, but we're specifically really eyeing the link between our introductory reimbursement course that our students take and then our advanced coding and reimbursement course, or advanced coding and revenue cycle is now the course. And it's between those two courses that we're going to pick up the bulk of our competencies for one of our domains. We have 6 domains, and went ahead and working with the ITRC. And again, it was very easy. I sent them a list of my accreditation domains and competencies, and they built the framework. And then I think I spent no more than about an hour with Sasha Johnson, making sure that those were linked correctly to the correct assignments, and that we weren't linking them to things like quizzes or exams where I couldn't count that as part of meeting a competency. And it was just a very smooth process. The folks at ITRC knew how to set it up. They had set everything up exactly to our accreditation standards. Now we're excited to see, as I've looked at my first report and seen that, yeah, we've only had one touch point on each of these in the intro class. Now to start building that into our advanced course to make sure that we get those two touch points with the students.
Thank you. Alicia, do you want to talk a little bit about the ease or difficulty of the process?
The only thing I would add to that is that Sasha in particular has been great about coming to faculty meetings and offering trainings for us. Just walking us through it again. She's created a little Google Doc for us, going step by step how we add them so everybody can remember. We seem to have short-term memory problems sometimes. But ease is just, it's great because I don't have to bug faculty at the end of the semester to go in and print out a report for each one of their individual classes. I can get that from ITRC. And so it's just, I don't know, it's a direct process. And it's just been really easy and helpful, and I think very time consuming on my end as a director.
Thank you for that and for mentioning Sasha's hard work. So maybe a little plug for Sasha Johnson. She's done a tremendous amount of work with competencies. But let's back up just a little bit and talk about the framework, because you've mentioned how tying competencies to assignments and assessments is a pretty straightforward process, but that's after the framework has been created and it's already in place. And so can you talk about a little bit about how the decisions on the framework and how it was put together, how that went for you, and if that was a challenge or if that was pretty seamless as well?
For me, it was incredibly seamless. Again, and I go back to the fact that ITRC, took the time to know my program. They took the time to know exactly what I needed. I believe, if memory serves me correctly, not only did I meet with Sasha, but I also met with Lisa, and the questions that they ask and the very much led me to understand how the framework was going to work. And by taking that time to understand my needs, it was really a seamless process. So once we discussed that, I'd explained what I needed. They went back and built the framework. And then we took a look at it one-on-one with Sasha and myself to make sure it was correct before we launched it in the course.
Yeah, thank you. Alicia, can you talk a little bit about your framework creation process?
As a non-computer expert, I thought it was pretty simple. I met with Sasha and a few other individuals, and we talked about what I needed it to look like. And basically, I gave them my competencies, and they worked their magic, and I got a lovely end product. So you know that my expertise is not computers. So what went on behind works great, but I don't know exactly what all they did. But we had a couple meetings there to work out what I needed and to ensure that what they built met my needs, and it definitely did. So very individualized, I think, to each program's needs. So that was helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, and maybe to explain a little bit about that whole framework creation process. What we do at the ITRC is to meet, like Alicia and Wade have said, with the department, and sometimes it's just with one person from the department, to determine what that framework should look like. What are the competency levels that students are expected to meet? And it might be a scale from not proficient to proficient, or whatever it is that your program needs, we're going to build it that way. And so we want to make it as easy as possible. We don't want you to have to be a computer expert or a Moodle expert in order to get competency frameworks into your program and to be able to use those, because the value that comes out of that is huge. And I think you're experiencing that right now. And I believe that we have just touched the tip of the iceberg. We're still creating more reporting features and more things that make it even more valuable to programs so that you can use them for things like accreditation purposes and to track student outcomes. Now that we've talked a little bit about frameworks, I want us to move a little bit into the process of adding those competencies to a signature assignment. I know, Alicia, you said that you have a cheat sheet that Sasha created so that you just go through the Google Doc. And when we do a task infrequently, I remember teaching for several years, every year you have, or every semester you have to input grades into the system, and you have to remember all the steps and not to miss one, but you only do it a couple times a year. And so you have to go back to the reference material to be able to do it correctly. And I think this is maybe one of those, a similar situation with competencies and attaching them to the assignments or the assessments in each course that they need to be attached to. So can you talk a little bit about that process, and maybe if there were any difficulties that you encountered, what those might have been?
For us, there were not a lot of difficulties because, as I previously stated, Sasha just sat down with, we met online in a Zoom meeting and brought my screen up, and we just walked through doing that. And so in this particular course, there were 9 case studies that needed to be linked and built according to our specifications. And she just literally walked me through those 9. And by the time I got to number 4 or 5, she probably could have clicked off and I would have been fine, but she stayed and held my hand. And so it was very easy. And you brought up a good point, Kimberly, about how customizable this is. Our accrediting body states that each one of those competencies has to be met at a certain percentage. And so as we were building this, that was built in so that I would immediately could take a look at the sheet and see who was not hitting those percentages. And it caused me to do a bit of a reevaluation in maybe the way I had structured those case studies, and allowed me to then take advantage of that tool that I had never used before of letting a student redo the work to at least get to that minimum standard. So going through this process and looking at it had the added benefit of changing the way that I was grading assessments in the course, probably for the better.
That's good feedback. I love hearing about the practical experience because we set it all up and then we let the car drive itself, hoping that it gets to the destination. But hearing like your actual experience that you're having is, I think, valuable for all of us to know what to expect. So, Alicia, do you have anything to add about that whole process that we've been talking about?
I think for us, it was mostly just as faculty learning the process, because even I myself, and I'm the one who worked with Sasha the most, I missed clicking something when I linked my competencies the first time. And so mine came back as a really incomplete and odd report. So working with Sasha and be like, oh, I didn't do that. And then realizing that 3 out of the 4 other faculty also did not do that. Going back in and figuring out where we made our mistake and learning from it. It's easy to do, but it's still, for us who are not computer experts, it's a bit of a learning curve for us. But ITRC's been great, been helpful. Every time I've needed help or I have a question, reach out, I get an immediate response. And like I said, Sasha's been great about coming to our faculty meetings and retraining us.
Yeah, and we are available to do that for any department that asks for it, where we just need to know that someone would like to have us do that. Thank you, both of you, for illustrating a little bit about what it might look like to use competencies. And maybe one thing that I want to mention is that it's really critical to set things up ahead of time, because before students submit, before things are really rolling in a class, we want all these things to be set up beforehand so that the reporting is accurate. Otherwise, like there's going to be big holes in the reporting. So let's move on to maybe talking a little bit about the data and how the data is showing for you now, as opposed to how it started, because we've created customized reports and we have done it according to what programs have told us they needed. And so we want to hear a little bit about what that's been like for you to go from maybe some limited data reporting to some more robust data reporting that you have available now.
For me, it's been great. My report is customized. I have to track competency by student. And so I get a list of my competencies, I have a list of my students, and it says who's met that particular competency. And so it's incredibly easy to read, it's incredibly easy to use. And basically that report is what I need to submit for accreditation. So it's been great. I have to put a couple of years together, but half my report's already there. I just have to do some cutting and pasting. And so for me, on my end, it's been absolutely fantastic. And it's, like I said, customized, individualized to exactly what my program needs to meet our accreditation needs. And I don't even want to know how many hours of work you've saved me by doing that. So I've been very, very appreciative of the ability to customize those reports and to get exactly the data pieces I need.
And in working through the process, when we set everything up, I really, when I've gone on and taken a look at things, there's only one report that I run, and it's an all report, but it kicks out by the competency. And so I see yes or no. There's the student's name, there's the competency, and yes or no. They met it or they didn't meet it. And again, it's causing us then to look a little more closely at the curriculum to say, wow, this particular competency really only needs to be met at a Bloom's level 2 or 3, why haven't I developed things in my curriculum so that's taken care of in this intro course, as opposed to this now having maybe some remediation needing to be done in the advanced course. So again, by looking at that and just having those really simple things, here's the competency, here's the name, yes or no, that's going to cause us to look at that report and not only have it for accreditation, but to build, I think, a better curriculum as we move forward with other courses coming online.
Thank you. And I think that's an important point to make, is that not just the benefit of reporting to your accrediting bodies and those institutions or individuals that are asking for information about your student success, student progress, but for the student themselves, because a student that is in a course can go and track their own progress with competencies. They can see if they've met the competencies that are designed for that particular course. And so it's on multiple levels. I think we look at competencies as a whole, and we can filter by course and see which courses have which competencies in them, and if they were met by, you know, the majority of students, or how many percent of students met the competency. We can drill down to the student and see which competencies in the program they've completed, well, what they have left to do. And so this helps with advising too. I foresee it being a useful tool for advisors to help students understand where they are in the path of learning all the things they need to know to be a proficient professional in the field that they're going to enter in the workforce. So that's really valuable for us to hear, especially with Alicia. You mentioned that it saved you a lot of time, and that's one of our goals too. We want you have to be able to spend more time teaching and less time crunching numbers. And so if a system can do that for us, then we're definitely going to take advantage of that. So as far as the data reporting, which aspect of it do you find is most useful for you?
I think being able to see each competency listed out and each student listed out, and just being able to go down the list or across the list and seeing, okay, they met everything, and not having to go try to find another piece of data. It's just all right there in one beautiful report.
Yep, that is perfect answer. Wade, do you have anything that is especially useful for you?
I would just absolutely concur. And again, Alicia's a little farther along in the process than I am. I've had one course that I've been able to look at, and I was playing with it just a little bit earlier today and looking at C as we bring, and it won't be this semester, but these students that we've had in this first iteration will now be in their advanced course in the spring. I'm excited to see how, once we set those up, how those reports then merge to get that really good look at the shared competencies between those two courses. And Alicia can probably tell a lot better how that's working, where I'm still in my infancy.
Do you have anything to add to that, Alicia?
We actually assess differently in that we only do a final summative assessment rather than an entry assessment and then a final assessment. So we only have, even though we assess multiple times throughout our program, we only have to report on that summative. So that's the only one that we're actually tracking at this time. It may change with the next round of accreditation standards, but for right now, that's all we have to track.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So now let's shift a little bit and talk about your department's goals and how Moodle competencies are aligning with those goals, or if they are aligning, period, with your department goals.
So I'd have to think just a little bit more deeply on that one, to be honest with you, because we have got the annual performance assessment review that most of us have to do for accrediting bodies. And at that point in time, we have to state certain goals for not only the students, but for ourselves as faculty. And right at this point in time, we haven't pulled anything from what we're doing with the competencies and tied it to a goal yet. We're more looking long term for when our next accreditation visit will be, and we're in the 2029 cycle is when we'll do that again. We're looking further along in having all of our courses by that point in time tied together. So it's very long range at this point for us, Kimberly. I think I'm muddying things a bit here as I listen to myself, but right now it's long term. We haven't really tied that into our accreditation goals yet. It will happen. I know it will happen, but we haven't done it yet.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you mentioned that it is a long-term process, but starting now is perfect timing for you particularly. And so maybe programs that have accreditation that they know is coming up in the foreseeable future, and they may be 5 years out or longer. And starting something like this now will buy us time to be able to get everything in place. And so those seamless reports are going to be part of that visit and part of that you can demonstrate of how your program is performing. So I think it's always good to look ahead. Alicia, do you have anything that you can add to that?
As we look at our program goals, they're set by accreditation standards, and they have to meet certain accreditation standards. And one of them is tied to program completion rates and time in which program is completed. And so the competencies are now tied to program completion. And so by tracking those, we can also track when program completion occurs for each individual student. And so I guess from that perspective, it's tied to program or departmental goals, hopefully.
So thank you, Emma, in the audience, for asking a question. She's asking, how has this impacted faculty workload, both in the setup and the scoring or running of reports? So just from the faculty perspective, maybe not director perspective or clinical coordinator perspective, but just individual faculty.
I think initially there was some fear that it was going to be very time consuming and cumbersome. But once we got going on it and they figured out how easy it was, it's just really a couple clicks of a button or a couple clicks in Moodle to get the competencies tied to the assignments. And then after that, aside from asking each individual faculty member to keep track of whether or not students are meeting those competencies throughout the semester, there really has been no additional workload on their end. Where had we not used ITRC to help us build those competencies in our courses, it would have been a lot more workload on the faculty, I think. So I think maybe, I don't know, they spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes a semester now. So it's been very minimal workload, I think, from our faculty's perspective.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I would concur. It has the time invested has been negligible. It really has. Just a handful of hours at the most, 3 or 4 hours total in working with ITRC to set that up the first time. And yeah, I would not be terribly concerned about the time investment or additional faculty workload. It just isn't there.
Thank you for that. And I think I speak for Sasha too when I say putting together the frameworks and getting it all set up is like solving a puzzle. And for us, it is more fun than work. And so we're happy to do that part of it, which is, that's really where the time factor is, I think, in that setup. Because once it's set up and in place, the attaching and then the pulling the reports is very quick and easy. And then Emma asked another question, are the competency connections able to be retained from one semester to the next? And you probably experienced this, but yes, once they're in place, they are there for you to use and to just keep reusing your course content and the competency frameworks from semester to semester. So that is another good news about the features of competencies. So then moving along a little bit, you probably, I'm assuming, had to use some other external tools or programs to track the same or similar progress of your students and your programs prior to using Moodle competencies. So can you talk a little bit about what maybe you were using and how competencies in Moodle has helped to minimize that need?
The way we have tracked this in the past was basically by an online tool that our accrediting body provided. And so you would go in and you would pull up a particular competency, and then you could input into that area which particular assignments were being given that led to the meeting of that competency, which courses they were in, etc. It was more of a database type of thing than it was a real true program. And we were tracking it, but not at the level that we'll be able to track it now. And our accrediting body hasn't been so much each individual student needed to be looked at. It was a global thing. But one thing we learned from our last accreditation visit is they're going to walk in and say, okay, let's take a look at Jane Smith and her progress through things. And then they would actually meet with the students and say, did you feel this competency was met for you? So I think this is going to be an excellent tool in helping us to do that. So we were tracking it more in just a real simple database or an Excel spreadsheet.
Good to know. Alicia, have you used any tools external to Moodle prior? And if so, what was that like?
No, our first year needing to track competencies was fall of 2022. So ITRC was right there to help us. With regard to what our accreditation visit's going to look like, I don't know yet. I'll know more in 2026. So, but for right now, this seems to be meeting our needs.
Good to hear that. We'll have to catch up again in 2026 to hear feedback from you post accreditation visit and see how it went. And then maybe even customize reports even more, depending on what those outcomes look like. Because that's another possibility that we're always looking at is, do departments need additional reporting? Do they need other features? Do they need more information that we can pull from the system? Because Moodle has a wealth of information and data that we can grab. We just need to know which pieces we need, which ones are valuable. So looking ahead, and I know we've talked a little bit about foreseeing what might be to come. Do you foresee any challenges that you are maybe concerned about, or that you can see that competencies are going to help you be able to solve or to meet?
One thing that we're looking at, I think all of us that have these extra external accreditors will vouch for, is as we move towards our next accreditation site visit, I suspect we will be in a brand new set of competencies. We're working with a set of competencies now that had to be implemented by 2018. They call them the 2018 competencies. And every 6 months or so, I expect new ones to be set up and then giving us the 2 to 3 years to implement before we're held fully accountable for them. So for me, as I look towards the future, my concern is exactly how we might be able to crosswalk those items to be able to show a pattern of meeting the competencies when we may be right in the middle of instituting new ones when our next accreditation visit comes. Does that make sense, Kimberly?
Yeah,
It may be terribly muddy. Alicia's nodding her head. I think she understands what I'm trying to drive at. But I'm hoping that there will be a way for us then to sit down with ITRC and kind of crosswalk some things as those new competencies are developed and sent out.
Yeah, and I believe if history repeats itself, there's not massive changes, although that's not an impossibility, but generally we take what we have and improve upon it. And so the bulk of the work has been done. That setup is really where the workload lies initially. And then making modifications is a pretty simple process. Alicia, do you have any challenges that you can speak to?
I was just thinking, as we look at the future, I think being able to see the competencies and achievement of a competency is going to help us to be able to identify students who are struggling, or possibly areas where our program is weaker in and that we need to spend more focused teaching at a certain competency to ensure that our students are more well versed in it or stronger in it. So I look to see that kind of being a benefit coming from the competencies. Is we'll be able to see where students are struggling. We'll be able to see where maybe our program is weak before we get to the accreditation visit, and so that we can adjust as we go. So rather than waiting every 5 years or 7 years to reevaluate our program, we can do that on a yearly basis, I think, a lot more easily now by having the competencies in front of us. And so I think in a way it puts us ahead of the curve instead of trying to catch up to it. So that's one of the things I'm excited for.
I love that answer. And just so that the audience is aware, we're working with several departments on competency frameworks, and this is a snapshot of what we're doing with departments in cooperation with them. One of the other departments, the initial conversation that I had with a director was that there was overlap in courses and there were gaps in the program. So some competencies were getting maybe touched on, but not really covered. Other ones were getting over covered or getting too much coverage in courses. And so the concern was, how do we make this balance out but we have to know where those gaps and redundancies are. And competencies help us reveal those things. And I think that's one of the things, maybe, Alicia, that you're alluding to, is that we really need to know what our students, like all of the things that they need in order to meet the competencies, get to proficiency level, and have these outcomes met by the time that they graduate, because we're sending them off to, most of the time, to serve or to give care in the healthcare system to people that need it. So we really want to prepare them well. And this is, like I said, one of the features of competency frameworks that can benefit a program. And it could be whichever program we're looking at. It doesn't necessarily have to be in healthcare, but we do have a lot of healthcare programs in our institution. Hopefully this story that you're telling can benefit a lot of those programs too. So now, looking, like, hindsight is always 2020, right? So looking back, what would you have done differently knowing what you know now, if anything?
I would have started much sooner than I have, I think. I really do think I would have started much sooner. And that way we would have some really excellent data by this point in time. I'm excited in the fact a year or 2 years down the road, what kind of data I'm going to see. So I think I would have instituted this in conjunction with the work I was doing in getting those courses certified through EISU. I really, in hindsight, would love to have done that in conjunction with that. And so if people are doing either or, maybe doing both together.
Yeah, that's good advice, I think, because it can be done. We just have to know that's the desire of the program, and we'd be happy to accommodate that. So, Alicia, do you have any words of wisdom from hindsight?
Not really. We're only 1 year into this process. And so I don't think I'm far enough into it to be able to give some good advice or words of wisdom at this point. In about 3 years, I'm sure I'll have some.
We'll have to do this again in 3 years then, at least, maybe sooner than that.
Kimberly, one thing I think I'd like to point out, and it came out here just in the last little bit, Alicia had talked about that one student who you start to get data on and start to see some things that may be an alert for you. This really, when we boil this down to the very basics, is all about making sure the student is receiving exactly what they need to be successful in their educational endeavors and in their professional careers. It really is. And so by having this data, especially if we're starting to get into with us, our students are with us for 2 years and then we graduate them. But if I'm ticking into that third semester and I see this student who has had to retake a particular assignment to fulfill a competency, that can alert to the fact that I'm not meeting that student's needs, and that it's time for me to step up and say, here's the extra resources that are available. So I really like the fact that we can look at things globally with this, but as it moves down the road, at least as I foresee it, as it moves down the road, I'm now drilling down to that individual student, which is really what we're all about as educators.
Yeah, your answer speaks to my teacher heart. I've been a teacher for a long time, and meeting that one student where they are and helping them get to where they want to be, I think, is the mission of all of us that are involved in education, at whatever level it might be. We want to see them succeed. So I love hearing that answer. Anything else that the two of you would like to add that you think would be valuable for other people that are considering adding competency frameworks to their programs?
I think we go back to the old advertising slogan, just do it.
I love that.
Really, just do it. You're going to find value in it, and it simply improves your courses. It really does.
Thank you. And just while we're wrapping up here, I want to thank both Wade and Alicia for being with us today and for sharing your experiences with Moodle competencies and helping us really see case study examples of how competencies can be beneficial for students in your programs, for students at the university wide, and what we can hope to achieve in the future. And Emma commented that her questions were answered, so thank you for that. There's another question. What assessments do they use? Exams, projects, etc. Can you, either one of you, speak to that?
We use primarily projects, case studies. Occasionally we'll use like a quiz, but because we have to track, to do an exam is very difficult because you have to track exactly those questions that pertain to that competency. So on the few times when we've used an exam, it's gone to being a quiz. So the quiz questions are specifically tied to that competency. But most of the time, it could be just an in-class activity. Like our students have to learn how to take blood pressures. So we can make it a yes or no. You showed up in class that day, you practiced that skill, and we can check you off as a yes. At the level I'm at, they don't have to be proficient at it. They just have to practice that skill. So we use a lot of in-class activities. We use reflections from activities that we have them do or experiences that we have them. We have some IPE or interprofessional competencies that we have to do. And so those can oftentimes be reflections that they write about their experience. And so there's a number of different ways that we can meet our assessments. I know some programs have very specific assessments that they have to do, but for us, we've got some freedom in how we assess, and we try to use a number of different types of assessments in order to be able to ensure that the students are meeting those competencies.
Yeah, thank you.
And we have that freedom as well, that we're given the competency and then we get to determine how we're going to meet it. And our program, just so you have some backstory here, used to be 100% seated. And in the 18 years that I've been here with ISU, that has transitioned now so that over the last 6 years or so, we have been 100% asynchronous online. And so we are very heavy into case studies in that environment. We also use forums in that environment. In one of my capstone courses, they're actually paired with a mentor from industry. There is a large project that's given, and to the best of our ability, we then have them work in teams to simulate the at-home work environment, because a good chunk of professionals in my field now work strictly from home. And that was true before COVID, and it became work from home on steroids after COVID. So we use a variety of those things to simulate the at-home work environment. And again, still have to have the quizzes and the exams because we're preparing to take a national level credentialing exam. And we need to help them understand how those are going to be formatted. And we very much rely on some of the publications from our national body that helps us to make sure that we're asking questions that I don't want to say we're teaching to the test, because we're not, but to help us to formulate questions that would mirror what they may see on the national exam. So we do have a wide variety of things that we use.
And I think that is true of all programs that are using competencies at ISU. It's very varied, and you're not stuck with one particular assignment type. If it's a graded item in Moodle, it can have competencies attached to it. So the freedom and the possibilities are really wide open. So I want to again thank you both for being with us, and we appreciate the work that you've been doing and that you'll continue to do. And we at the ITRC pledge to do our part so that it continues to be successful for you and your programs and your faculty and your students. And if anyone would like to know more about competencies or would like to set up a meeting to discuss the possibilities of competencies in your program, please reach out to us at the ITRC and we can set aside some time, have a discussion, and then probably build you a framework for you to review. and to sign off on and modify as we need to. So that is an ongoing iterative process that we just continually improve until we get the version that is going to work for you. So we do appreciate you sharing your stories with us today. Thank you very much.